Ow. 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 I praise him in the morning, I praise him at night, I praise him in the noon, I'ma praise him with my life. Lord, 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 Lord. I praise him in the morning, I praise him at night.
The scroll of Daniel. Then I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose loins were girded with fine gold of Uphaz. His body also was like the beryl, and his face as the appearance of lightning, and his eyes as lamps of fire, and his arms and his feet like in color of polished brass, and the voice of his words like the voice of a multitude. And he said unto me, O Daniel, a man greatly beloved, understand the words that I speak unto thee, and stand upright, for unto thee am I now sent. And when he had spoken this word unto me, I stood trembling. Then there came again and touched me one like the appearance of a man, and he strengthened me. Then said he, Knowest thou wherefore I come unto thee? And now will I return to fight with the prince of Persia. And when I am gone forth, lo, the prince of Grecia shall come. The scroll of Isaiah. Thus says Yahuwah to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden, to subdue nations before him, and I will loose the loins of kings, to open before him the two levied gates, and the gates shall not be shut.
Ancient Persia, fearless, formidable, unrelenting, for ages shrouded in mystery, an empire unparalleled in conquest and riches.
To create an empire of the size of the Persian Empire, the largest empire the world had known, obviously takes military skills.
From North Africa to Asia, it was a civilization driven by a dynasty of extraordinary rulers, ambitious and all-powerful.
Cyrus the Great is one of the few who deserves to be called the Great.
The Persian Empire created some of the most astonishing feats of engineering the world has ever seen. Magnificent palaces that rose up from barren desert. Roadways, bridges, and canals.
Everyone has heard of the Suez Canal, but how many have heard of Darius's Canal?
But dark clouds were on the horizon. An ancient rivalry with Greece would erupt into an epic clash that changed the course of history and shaped the Western world for thousands of years to come.
Zerubbabel and Jeshua and the rest of the chief of the fathers of Israel rebuild the temple of Shlomo. Ezra, now in the first year of Cyrus king of Persia, that the word of Yahuwah by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, Yahuwah stirred up the spirit of Cyrus king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and put it also in writing, saying, Thus says Cyrus king of Persia, Yahuwah, power of heaven, hath given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he hath charged me to build him an house at Jerusalem, which is in Yahuyada.
I equate Persia with luxury, with rich tapestries and beautiful rugs and my mother's fat, fuzzy Persian cat named Otis. But I also think of a fantastic Persian king named Cyrus the Great, who believed in religious and cultural tolerance, and who freed the Jews from Babylon to return to Israel.
Imported at the conquest? Who? What? Daniel. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Yashara'el, and of the king's seed, and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans.
Cyrus was a very innovative builder, and I might add that his standards were particularly high. We can also say that his building project reflected in some ways the technologies that he found in the course of his various conquests.
Like the Romans centuries later, the Persians were borrowers. They took the best and most advanced ideas from the cultures they conquered, then developed them even further into technologies uniquely their own. The art and engineering of Pasargad drew on influences as far-flung as Assyria, Egypt, and Asia Minor, thousands of miles away.
There were stone workers, woodworkers, brick makers, relief makers, and we know that these were people often imported from all over the empire.
Cyrus and Yahudians. Yahuwah decreed that a person named Cyrus would command the temple to be rebuilt. The law was fulfilled despite all the efforts of men. The scroll of Ezra. Then the people of the land weakened the hands of the people of Yahuwah and troubled them in building, and hired counselors against them to frustrate their purpose, all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even unto the reign of Darius, king of Persia.
In 539, Cyrus conquered Babylon, but he did not present himself as a conqueror. He presented himself as a liberator, rescuing these people from their despotic ruler. And then he did a totally unprecedented thing. He freed the Jews. The Jews had been living in Babylon in captivity ever since Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Jerusalem and their temple, and Cyrus freed them. Now, it could be said in hindsight or political history that Cyrus was looking for a buffer state between a hostile Egypt and his own empire. But so what? The point is that no one had ever done anything like this, and hardly anyone has ever done anything like it since.
Before he could launch the campaign that would make Persia the lone superpower of the ancient world, Cyrus the Great died in battle in 530 BC.
He didn't live long enough to show what really he could have done outside the battlefield. So in that sense, you can compare him with Julius Caesar, who conquered, but did not live long enough, he was assassinated, to put the empire that he conquered together.
By the time Cyrus died, the Persian Empire had three capitals: Babylon, Susa, and Ecbatana.
Ezra, Nehemiah, building of Yahuwah walls. Order of Hebrews of Jacob before and during Persia. Yeshaya, Jeremiah, Daniel, Ezekiel, Esther, and Azariah, Nehemiah. All are either witnessed Babylonian or Persian captivity.
Rivals and pretenders to the throne vied for power. Then a distant cousin of Cyrus, a brilliant general, rose up to assume power. When the smoke cleared, the Persian Empire was securely in his grasp. His name was Darius, and he would become arguably the greatest Persian king and one of the greatest builders of all time. Darius hit the ground running. He began by rebuilding the old capital of Susa, with brand new palaces adorned in glazed brick. Today, the magnificence of the capital Susa is even found in the Bible.
When the Greeks talk about Persian palaces, for example, they routinely mention Susa. When the Old Testament book of Esther talks about Persian palaces, it's Susa that they mention.
By 500 BC, Persia was the largest empire the world had ever seen, even exceeding the size and wealth of Rome at its height 4 centuries later. Persia was invincible, and its appetite for conquest was beginning to frighten an emerging power across the Mediterranean, the city-states of Greece.
a little geographical info. That big body of water out there is the Black Sea. This thin body of water here is the Bosphorus Strait that connects the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. So I'm standing in Asia, or Asia Minor, if you will, and that land over there is Europe. Now, in 494 BC, Darius put down a revolt from some cities on the coast of Turkey. But this revolt had been supported by Athens, so Darius wanted to teach Athens a lesson. He was going to march on Greece and attack that city. But how is he going to do it? He's got to go across the sea. Well, he takes a bridge of boats, pontoons, if you will, and lines them up from that point to that point and marches an army, so Herodotus says, of 70,000 men across the sea to attack Greece. Amazing. It is late August in the year 490 BC. Darius has already marched into Greece and taken Macedonia. Now he's destined to meet the Greek general Themistocles and an army from Athens and Corinth at the famous Battle of Marathon. A massive army from Persia numbers 60,000 or 140,000, 250,000, depending upon the propaganda you read. Suffice it to say, the Greeks are outnumbered 10 to 1. Their only recourse is to send for reinforcements. So the legendary runner Philippides runs from Marathon to Sparta, a distance of 140 miles in 2 days, hence the name of the race, Marathon.
The two armies faced each other separated by a vast open plain. If they clashed head-on, the massive Persian forces would mow down the greatly outnumbered Greeks. This was the beginning of the Persian Wars. A reduced Greek force attacked the Persians head-on. The Persians went for an easy kill. But the remaining Greek forces had split into two and opened two other fronts against the Persians. Sucked into a bloody slaughter pit, the Persians suffered heavy losses and retreated. For the Greeks, it was a great victory. For the Persians, just a speed bump on their path to world domination. Darius decided to return home and turn his attention to shoring up Persepolis, his capital city. He would never get there. In 486 BC, Darius died on his way to quelling a rebellion in Egypt, leaving behind an empire that redefined the very notions of power and glory. He also prevented a replay of the chaos that followed the death of Cyrus by naming his successor, his son Xerxes.
Xerxes Ahasuerus, who married Esther. Ezra. Then the people of the land weakened the hands of the people of Yahuyadah and troubled them in building, and hired counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even unto the reign of Darius, king of Persia. And in the reign of Ahasuerus, Xerxes, in the beginning of his reign, wrote they unto him an accusation against the inhabitants of Yahuyadah and Jerusalem.
Now, Cyrus the innovator and Darius the expansionist were very hard acts to follow. But Xerxes had been a king in waiting all of his life. And a couple of his first acts were to suppress a rebellion in Babylon, another one in Egypt. And then he went after the Greeks. Somehow the Greeks just stuck in his craw. Some historians argue that Xerxes was making a preemptive strike. Others say that he was just cleaning up the business of his father. Whatever the case, the Greeks were no longer intimidated or impressed by the Persians since they'd beaten them at Marathon. And so Xerxes buddied up with the Carthaginian navy and the tip of what is now modern Tunisia, and he decided to beat the Greeks at sea.
.480 BC, the Persian Empire is at its peak, vast, immensely powerful, and incredibly rich. It's been 10 years since the Greeks defeated Darius the Great at the Battle of Marathon. His son Xerxes is now the latest absolute monarch in Persia's Achaemenid dynasty, and Xerxes wants revenge. Greece is only beginning to emerge as a force to be reckoned with. a coalition of profoundly different city-states, from democracies to dictatorships. They are united only by one creed, their hatred of Persia. The ancient world is on the verge of the Second Persian War. The outcome will lay the foundation for the modern world.
Greeks traditionally called everybody except themselves barbarians. So this whole thing really between East and West started probably with the Persians and the Greeks and continued ever since.
The Persian invasion of Greece would be one of the greatest collaborations of strategy and engineering in military history. The massive invasion would be a complex land-sea assault, demanding some astonishing feats of engineering. Xerxes wanted his forces to enter Greece at the Isthmus of Mount Athos, but the seas there were so turbulent, the king directed his builders to dig a canal across the isthmus. With vast manpower and expertise in canal engineering, Xerxes' engineers took a mere 6 months to complete the canal across the isthmus. But the next challenge facing his generals and architects was even greater. The huge Persian army still had to cross the 1.5-mile-wide Hellespont. To this day, their solution is considered one of the most ambitious engineering projects ever conceived for a military campaign. Borrowing a page from his father's book, Xerxes ordered a double pontoon bridge built across the Hellespont. A feat of engineering that would far surpass the bridge Darius built at the Bosphorus. A superhighway emerged, crossing the Hellespont using battleships as the foundation.
Remember, we're dealing with the hooves of tens of thousands of cavalry, including armored cavalry, which would have been much, much heavier. The ships were amazingly kept stable, so this allowed Xerxes to cross with his army into Europe and cross back when he needed to, and the ships were kept in place. And for a short period, Europe and Asia were one.
10 days later, with his bridge complete, Xerxes marched into Europe.
The whole army crossed with heavy equipment, heavy cavalry, and the planks were kept in place. There was no breaking of the planks, not only due to the weight of the army crossing it, but due to the choppy waters of the Bosphorus.
Xerxes' strategy was simple: overwhelm the Greeks on land and at sea with superior numbers. Once again, the Greeks were led by the great general Themistocles. He knew he couldn't beat Xerxes on land, so the entire campaign was designed to lure the Persian navy into a trap. In August of 480 BC, the two armies met at a spot chosen by the Greeks, Thermopylae, a mountain pass so narrow only one chariot at a time could get through. For days, the massive Persian army was stalled, bottlenecked on the wrong side of the pass, just as the Greeks planned. In the meantime, unseen by the Persians, Themistocles left with most of his army, leaving only a token force of 6,000 Spartans behind. Like his father before him, Xerxes was about to charge headlong into a Greek trap. When they finally broke through the narrow pass, the Persians easily destroyed the meager Spartan force Themistocles had left behind as bait and marched toward Athens. But when Xerxes reached the city, Athens was deserted. Xerxes suspected he had been duped and would make the Athenian people pay for it. For generations, tolerance for their vanquished had been the hallmark of Persian kings. Not this time. In a very un-Persian-like act, Xerxes burnt Athens to the ground. The Persian king regretted it immediately, and the following morning ordered Athens rebuilt. But it was too late. The deed was done. His moment of rage would come back to haunt Persia nearly 200 years later. But this war was still far from over. At the same time, Themistocles was setting his trap, that lured the massive Persian navy into the narrow bay at Salamis. Then he unleashed a surprise attack. The huge Persian fleet was caught in the naval equivalent of gridlock. They couldn't maneuver in the tiny bay, while the Greeks used their heavy triremes as battering rams to demolish the Persian ships. It was a decisive victory for the Greeks. Xerxes returned home defeated, king of a Persian empire that was no longer invincible.
Artaxerxes, Osiris' son, Ezra. And I, even I, Artaxerxes the king, do make a decree to all the treasures which are beyond the river, that whatsoever Ezra the priest, the scribe of the law of the power of heaven, shall require of you, it be done speedily. These are now the chief of the fathers, and this is the genealogy of them that went up with me, Ezra, from Babylon in the reign of Artaxerxes the king.
In 480 BC, the Greeks had defeated the Persian fleet at Thermopylae. The aura of invincibility that surrounded this empire was gone. But there were still days of power and glory ahead for the Persian Empire. 15 years later, in 465 BC, the Persian king Xerxes died. Xerxes left the empire to his son, Artaxerxes, who was determined to take Persia back to its golden days. He began by turning his attention to a building project begun by his grandfather, Darius. 4 decades after it was started, Persepolis, the magnificent capital city, was still under construction. Now, Artaxerxes would oversee one of the last great engineering projects of the Persian Empire.
Artaxerxes kicks Greek. Macedonian prince named Alexander, the not-so-great.
By the 4th century BC, Persian engineering was still the finest in the world. But underneath the soaring columns and shining palaces, the empire's very foundations were crumbling. And its enemies were soon at the gate.
When Athens supports a rebellion in Egypt and Greeks occupy the capital city of Memphis, Artaxerxes leaves Persepolis and his building projects, and he launches a military campaign to kick the Greeks out of Memphis and bring Egypt back under Persian control once again. It'll be the last great victory of the Persian Empire, because in 424 BC, Artaxerxes dies, leaving a power vacuum and 8 solid decades of rampant infighting and neglect. And while the Persian Empire is embroiled in internal conflict and corruption, a young Macedonian prince is studying Herodotus and the accounts of the great Persian hero Cyrus the Great. And this Macedonian prince will set his eyes on conquering the world. His name is Alexander.
Darius III. Yes, there are more than one Darius rulers.
In 336 BC, a distant relative of Artaxerxes rose to power. He took a regal name, Darius III. He will always be remembered as the king who lost an empire. Over the next 4 years, Alexander and Darius III met head-to-head in a series of fierce battles, as Darius III's army was slowly pushed back to its own doorstep. In 330 BC, Alexander was at the gates of the empire's crown jewel, the capital city of Persepolis.
Alexander adopted the Persian policy of respecting the defeated. None of his soldiers were allowed to pillage or plunder the lands they had conquered. But how do you tame so many soldiers after a victory over the most magnificent empire on planet E? Well, maybe his soldiers were restless or resentful, or maybe they just remembered the stories of how Athens had been burned by the Persians. In any case, at Persepolis, they let go. Huge celebrations took place after the victory, and during these celebrations, the treasury was pillaged. And then one of the saddest acts of arson in all of history took place. Persepolis was burned.